But this topic is not just comic fodder. Debate over Jewish racial identification has played into the community's discussion of such issues as affirmative action, which was just dealt a serious blow by the Supreme Court. And the U.S. Census, for example, does not differentiate racially between Ashkenazi or Sephardic or Mizrahi Jews, categorizing those with Middle Eastern or North African roots simply as white. So on this week's Jewish Forum, we ask, are Jews white? And joining us to discuss the issue is Chaya Lev, an activist and influencer, and she's in our Tel Aviv studios. We have Chen Mazig, a Jewish online influencer and author, senior fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. He's in London. And joining us from Atlanta is Dave Schechter, freelance journalist and writer. And Dave, you wrote a column, Are Jews White? Yes or no? What's the yes and what's the no?
Actually, I wound up writing two columns. One was, are Jews white, yes or no? The other was, are Jews white? Well, the first one was, are Jews white? It's complicated. And it is complicated. Look, I'm speaking from Atlanta, from the United States. My own identities may be of some help here. I'm an American by nationality, I'm a Jew by religion, and I happen to be white by skin pigmentation. Frankly, to say that Jews are white gets into an area that simply isn't correct. We know that there is an increasing number of Jews in the United States who are not white. They may be African Americans who've converted to Judaism, or African Americans whose families converted to Judaism many years ago. There are Jews of Mizrahi descent who may not consider themselves to be white because they are Middle Eastern roots. There are Jews of Ethiopian descent. There are Jews from everywhere in the United States. The percentage that would be considered Jews of color is estimated somewhere in the 8 to 12% range, but I'm not sure anybody really knows for sure.
Right, but But the question we're asking is, should Jews have white privilege? Let me go to Chen Mazig, because you've argued as one of those Jews from Middle Eastern descent, you should not be just considered as white. But the U.S. Census would, for example, put you in that category, Chen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we're talking about the U.S., there's a very specific definition of what it means to be white. And you mentioned in your introduction that Jews are attacked by white supremacists. Jews are being killed in Europe because we weren't European. That was the whole hateful ideology of Hitler. But I think because Jews had one of the longest diaspora of any people, we have assimilated in some ways in some of the countries that we've been in. In Europe, we lived for 600 years. In the Middle East, we lived for thousands of years. We all started from Israel. It doesn't matter if you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi or Mizrahi. But there is a distinction when, someone that looks more Middle Eastern in America, which is a white Christian society, will probably be questioned more in the airport, would probably be profiled. So we need to recognize that. But I don't think that anti-Semitism is racism, right? Because not per se, because racism is about subjugation and enslavement. Anti-Semitism is about eradication. I think that's the main difference.
Well, Chaya, let me ask you, because from your perspective as a Jew of color or a Jew from African American roots, your experience is going to be different, certainly from Dave's, and I would say even from Chen in some degree, especially that discussion about white privilege.
Absolutely. Listen, I had a whole spiel of, I was going to get on here and say, of course Jews are not white. We're from Israel, we're from Judea and Samaria, but when we're talking about the context of America, you have to, it's like a kugel or a croissant. It's a lot of flaky, crusty layers, okay? First of all, you have to think about the social structure in America. And you also have to look at Jews. Historically, we weren't a colorized society. We're a tribe. So that really hasn't applied to us. Anywhere we've gone around the world, being white, that was never enough. We've still been kicked out and murdered and killed. In America, look at your census. What does it say as a Jew when you click on a census? Now, I want to really say something really quick. I love, hello to the first gentleman that introduced himself. He said, African American converts. I want to say clearly right now, every black African American person from America did not convert. I did gladly. It's such an honor. But I want to clarify that. Every black person that is from America did not convert to Judaism. Also, ask Jews when black people walk to the front door, who is questioned. So if we're not white,
you mean at a synagogue, for
at
example?
a Beit Knesset, of course, at a synagogue. So it's not even so much of what the world thinks of us, it's who do we think that we are. I don't think at all that Jews are white because I know better. But in America, the social construct is proximity to whiteness. And as a black woman, I know that people in our community passed, and why not? I mean, if it can make my life easier, why not, right? But we have to have that conversation that there is a proximity to whiteness for some American Jews. In the process of American conversation, it's always about colorism.
Right.
Okay?
I'll say that. Let me say that Chaya is right about something, and I want to be clear about this. I know families who are Jewish, African American families, date 3-4 generations back. I know some African Americans in my own congregation. They are the first generation of their family who are Jewish.
It's a mix. It's a big ball.
It is. And what she says about what happens when you come to a synagogue, this is regrettable. It is racist. It is unfortunate. And it still happens that African Americans who happen to be Jewish come to a synagogue, and someone at the synagogue who is not African American, who is white, will say something such as, "Can I help you? Why are you here?" And when they identify themselves, will say, "Really? You're Jewish?" Now, I belong to a congregation in the Reconstructionist movement that has quite a diverse membership. And we haven't encountered very much of that, but I've heard it from African American Jewish leaders in Atlanta for several years now. They've all encountered this. I will tell you one thing that Chaya said about the construct. Once upon a time, Jews were not considered generally white in this country. They were separate. The playwright Alfred Urey, who authored Driving Miss Daisy, Last Night at Ballyhoo, and Parade, which is back on Broadway, tells a story that back in the 1940s, he asked his mother, "Are we white?" And she said, "No, we're not white, we're Jewish." Well, at a certain point, perhaps in the 70s and 60s, it began to change, and Jews who are white became seen more as white. What's happened in the last decade or so is a greater recognition within the Jewish community of a growing population of Jews who are not white, whether they're African American, whether they're Ethiopian, whether they're from the Indies, whether they're from the Middle East and North Africa. And I should point out, is to what Hen was saying, that there is Arab American groups have been pushing for years to get a MENA, a Middle East and North Africa category, put into the census. It would benefit both their community and the Jewish community to have a better sense of representation.
Right. Chaya, let me go back to that phrase you used, proximity to whiteness, because I think that's the issue where it becomes quite complicated, even for Jews, for example, of Sephardic or Mizrahi background. Some of them are their skin tones are very dark, and then there's some who are very light. And even within the context of Israel, where you have a growing Ethiopian Jewish community, one could argue there's a white privilege at play even for Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews compared to that community.
Look, when I got the call about this conversation, it's so, I'm in so many groups, and the Jews of color. When I say in Israel, I'm a Jew of color, it really seems very weird. In America, the black Jews have to say I'm a Jew of color because it's this whole thing about, like you say, proximity to whiteness. And at the end of the day, it's America. Jews did not want it. We're like the Jews that were, Ashkenaz, Sephardi. They were like, we just want to be Jews. And America said, no, your skin's white, you're going to go over here. And, you may benefit a little bit from it. I mean, we have to be honest about, yes, Jews are not white, but in America, it becomes so muddy. And I don't think that, listen, if at the end of the day, when I go outside, I'm just black. And so if I don't say something in America, they don't know. They're just looking like, where's she from? Now, if you send your kid to school and they're not visibly Jewish, and when I say visibly Jewish, because this is also a conversation, I mean with kippah, tzitzit, black and white, Crown Heights. What I'm saying is, if you send your son, his name is Connor, by day, and Mordechai ben Moshe by night on the Bima, and if he goes to USC and no one, unless they ask him or talk to him, you have to say, he's a white kid. It's nobody's idea to tell you who you are. If you're Jewish and you're Jewish, no one can tell me who I am.
As you say, that the rise in white supremacist movements in the U.S. have made Jews less certain of their definitions, some that may have categorized themselves as white. But does the Jewish community have to be careful, in some sensitive to the fact that that they can't just fully exit out of white privilege, given even for fellow Jews of color, never mind those other ethnicities?
Okay, let me make a couple of points. One, if I'm walking down the street and someone sees me, I'm white. I'm not a religious, observant Jew. They see me, I'm white. I have that degree of privilege which says I'm not suspected, I'm not looked at differently by the majority simply because of skin color. On the other hand, I live in Georgia, and in 1915, Leo Frank was lynched. Leo Frank was not lynched because he was a white man. Leo Frank was lynched because he was Jewish. We have recently, in the Atlanta area, had repeated incidents of a group, whose name I shall just skip for the moment, protesting outside of synagogues, carrying Nazi flags, throwing leaflets into people's driveways. They don't care if the recipients, the people they're harassing, the people they're attempting to put fear into, they don't care if they're white or black or Mizrahi. They care that they're Jewish.
Well, that's a good point. We'll have to leave it at that. I want to thank Dave Schechter, Chaya Lev, and unfortunately we did lose Chen Mazel during the break. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
We're gonna